it seems, to be honest, it seems like an odd project for an historian from Northern Ireland to undertake. So how were you introduced to this history, and how does it relate to your particular research interests?
Thanks, Camden. Yeah, it's a fair question. What on earth takes someone from Belfast to North Idaho? Don't we have enough religious nutcases at home? Well, of course we do. But at least when you go elsewhere, you get to meet nicer ones than some of the ones that I might be involved with here. I began working on this project, I suppose, about 25 years ago when I was doing my PhD in Glasgow at University of Strathclyde. And I used to go frequently across to a bookshop in Edinburgh, James Dixon Books, which still operates today. Great second-hand bookshop for items of Scottish Reformed provenance. Anyway, I literally stumbled over a pile of these Credenda Agenda magazines that were down in their basement. And, this was about maybe 1995, the autumn of 1995. Credenda Agenda had been going for about 7 or 8 years by that point. And, I took them home. I began to read them. It was quite, an extraordinary experience in many ways. I was spending my days reading Puritan apocalyptic material and my night reading Credenda Agenda. And there was this kind of lovely crossover between the two. There's a real kind of continuity between the way in which a lot of my 17th century subjects were thinking about current responsibilities and future prospects. And I saw the same kinds of themes coming out in Credenda Agenda. And through Credenda Agenda and through other sources in the bookshop, I became interested in reading the work by Gary DeMar initially, then Gary North, eventually to Rushdoony, once I realised that Rushdoony was not some kind of drug, but actually a writer with some interesting things to say. And over the course of time, just kept thinking about some of the things that were going on coming out of North Idaho, watched the community that Doug Wilson was leading grow, evolve, change its name, become increasingly self-consciously reformed, not least in the stylization of the church's name, moving from Community Evangelical Fellowship to Christkirk sometime around, I think, 1998 or 1999. And, kept in touch with some of the things that were being published, especially in issues like infant baptism, as I was sort of reading my way through some of these controversies that interest us. And I suppose, all of that was going on, and that was interesting. But then about 2008, the financial crash came, and I became interested in some of the online discussions about survivalist cultures. And especially a website run by a man called James Wesley Rawles, who identified himself then, I think still does, as a Reformed Baptist. And James Wesley Rawles defined this concept of the American Redoubt. So this is a section of Idaho, Montana, Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, and so on, that kind of area, which he thought was really ideally placed to be a holdout for traditional Christian values as the rest of American culture began to crumble. So what was really interesting about James Wesley Rawles was that he began to publish novels. And now his novels were initially self-published. Then he began to get really big deals for some of his novels with, really major publishers began to take these on. And what really caught my attention was when in one of these novels, some of the characters actually ended up going to Doug Wilson's church. Right. And I think if I remember correctly, one of them was serving as a security detail outside Christchurch, Moscow, Idaho, which is just a fascinating moment of crossover. So I was working in Dublin at that point, which is not in Northern Ireland, Camden. It's in a separate country, just for clarification. So I was working in Dublin at that point with a good friend of mine still, who's from Coeur Scott Spurlock, who teaches theology at Glasgow University. And Scott and I decided that we would love to do a bit of a road trip, but academics, they don't want to pay for anything themselves. Of course not. So we had to turn this into a research project to get funding to pay our way to drive around Eastern Washington and North Idaho, which we did, and it was great fun, enormous fun. And we had a great time, but we also met some really interesting people, saw some really interesting, sometimes peculiar, sometimes even slightly dangerous things, talking to a really quite a wide range of people who are associated with this movement into the Pacific Northwest. So the really important thing I think to realise about this is it's a very decentralised movement. There's no one leader, there's no one place that people gather to. There's a lot of different agendas here, a lot of different aspirations, a lot of different kinds of ambitions. Some people are much more confident about being able to survive the impending crisis than others. All of them want to. All of them have slightly different views for what might come in the aftermath of this crisis. So anyway, there we were driving around, and we spent a really interesting weekend in Moscow, Idaho in the summer of 2015 with folk from Christkirk, from New St Andrews College and so on. And we had a really interesting chat. The first night we arrived, we went to the bar, which is the only student-friendly bar in Moscow, Idaho, and it's run by someone who goes to Doug Wilson's church. And, of course, I was sipping orange juice. Everyone else was into their kind of heavy-duty stuff, or perhaps not. But, we were sitting there having this conversation, and, we raised the issue of James Wesley Rawles. And were they aware of James Wesley Rawles? And none of the faculty members that we were hanging out with, I think, had heard of him. I think Doug Wilson had heard of him, but none of them were aware of the status of their congregation in this incredibly powerful, incredibly diversified survivalist culture. So that was a really telling moment of disjunction between what I might have thought was the case before I actually got there to see what was going on with Scott, my friend Scott Spurlock. Wow. So I mean that was really how it started. Camden, summer 2015, driving around, back again in the summer of 2016. Some long distance telephone call interviews stretching back, I suppose, to 2013, and then in the period after that. And the book that we're talking about is the fruit of that very well receipted research trip.